All right, we are about to get started. Um, we can see already most of you joining. Welcome, everyone. We're thrilled to have you here, and we would like you to take a moment to settle in and feel free to drop a quick hi in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. I'm currently joining from New York, and I believe the majority of the speakers are also actually joining from New York, except for one of those speakers, Meredith, who's in California. And we are very excited for today's conversation on how to build a forward-thinking people strategy. And before we dive in, I want to introduce you to our fantastic panel of speakers and our fantastic moderator. There is Anita, founder and CEO of Telera. She offers business English training and culture training and works very closely with HR leaders. There is Melanie, Chief People Officer at Athena, a compliance training provider. Melanie has plus 10 years of HR experience and is known for her fresh, people-centered approach to tackle HR challenges. And there's Luck, VP People and Culture at Leapsome, the all-in-one platform for seamless people ops. And Luck has 15 years of HR experience at Spotify and Teachable, and now at Leapsome. And last but not least, there is our moderator, Meredith, the founder and CEO of Think Human, a leadership development company that helps leaders build companies where people actually want to work and thrive in. And with that, I'll hand it over to our moderator, Meredith. The stage is yours, and
All
we'll go offline.
Lovely. Thank you. So good to be here with everybody. I love that we have people from all over the globe today. I saw Argentina, Switzerland, Brazil, the US and Canada, Bangladesh, Nepal, a few places in Europe. So happy that you are all here, and want to just highlight before we get started that this conversation is in fact a dialogue. So we are paying attention to you all in the chat and in this amazing community. So please get your voice into the conversation rather than just watch like TV. We are excited what questions you have and also what insights you have for us and each other. So I'm going to kick us off with a question for the group, but let's start with you, Melanie, about how do you define business forward HR, and why is it more urgent now than in past cycles from your perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question, I think, in particular, because we're constantly redefining what effective HR means. And I think HR looks, rightly so, a little bit different at each company. In my opinion, the purpose of an HR function is to create a people strategy that will most effectively drive the business goals. Like, that's what it is. It starts with the business, and then you build the people strategy from there. But really, and I think we're starting to talk about this more now than ever. The ways in which we do that is by driving high performance, by making sure that every dollar that we spend on our employees, which are both our greatest asset and also realistically our greatest expense, is optimally spent, right? I always say the thing I always think about is, imagine if you had $100,000 contract with a vendor every year, and that vendor was not meeting your expectations. There is no HR person in their right mind who would choose to renew that $100,000 contract at the end of the year if that vendor wasn't meeting expectations. And yet, we do this constantly with employees who cost more than $100,000, even just one single employee. And if you look at that spread out across a company, that's millions of dollars that you are renewing without pressure testing. Is this optimally spent? And so why this is so important now is because, as we've seen, we had the highs of 2021, and then we saw the lows of 2022. And because people were not pressure testing the efficacy and efficiency of their spend on employees, which again greatest asset, but also greatest expense. Companies had to make incredibly tough decisions with mass layoffs, cutting perks and benefits, and not being able to do so in a strategic and thoughtful way. And so really, as we talk more and more about the importance of people, it's really, really important that we talk about it in the context of a true strategic business partner versus here's the business and then here's HR in a silo, trying to make things fun. Of course, there is a time and a place for employee experience, but employee experience should be viewed as being in service of productivity and overall business success. I'll pause there because that could go on forever.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, I think that when we think about business forward HR, I think it's about shaping the business, really having a seat at the table, shaping where the business is going, and also functioning as a growth engine, right? So it's not just about people management, or you're not just in an administrative silo, but we are really making decisions that shift, that bring the company forward. So you really want to shift the mindset from being just, an HR function to being a business partner, right? I think it's super important to make workforce decisions based on, like what Melanie just said, what's happening in the world, but like based on data, predictive insights, analytics. You want to help leadership anticipate like trends that are happening, reduce risk, performance. So I think to kind of summarize it, it's not just about, that you support business. You're not a supporter. You're not just supporting business decisions. You are shaping them. And I think it's so urgent now because, with automation, so many of the tasks that HR used to do, they're gone, right? They're automated. And so it really frees up, space to think about these kind of big picture things. We're going to talk a lot more about that, what that actually means. But then also, with so much volatility in a lot of companies under pressure, you always want to think about like being a profit center and not a cost center, right? So your function has to be a profit center. You have to be essential. You have to help in, delivering value, revenue, performance to stay essential.
Luck, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, just totally agree with what everyone is saying. I think the other thing is that when you frame like HR as a support function, I think that's already sort of the issue, right? Like I think we as people leaders are part of the business, right? Like the HR business partner function, but every role in HR should have some understanding of the business and what's going on. And I would say that the more you can partner and understand what's happening, you can make your programs more thoughtful. And I think the problem with some of the HR stuff, especially with smaller companies, it's reactive. Like some leader will hear about something and then you do this thing. And people strategy, what Melanie was talking about, is thoughtful, and you have to design it and you have to implement it. You can't just like pick something off the shelf and like think it's going to work in the next cycle. You actually have to plan for some of these things. And so I think that's part of it, really making sure that the people strategy is in line with the business strategy and that they can work together to create the outcome. Because otherwise you're sort of throwing something in, as a Hail Mary or something, and it may or may not work. And usually it doesn't because it's this reactive thing. So the more proactive and thoughtful and strategic we can be at the foundation of people strategy, I think this is where you can make a difference.
Yes. Let me ask you a question about metrics. I know some HR folks that I totally respect and admire, like great thinkers, and the metrics that they have been asked to be responsible for are things like the engagement survey results or satisfaction scores on training. And it's not that those are bad metrics. They are, in fact, it's better to have metrics than not metrics, and those things are important, right? But they're not necessarily a direct driver of the business. What do you see? That was context. Now, my question is this. In the pendulum swing over the last few years, what were the metrics that were most important that you were seeing, and what are the metrics that they are shifting to now? And what do you see as kind of the benefit or cost of that change? And let's start with you, Luck. Again, let's go back to you.
So yes, great question. I'm thinking about this myself. I think, so your main question was the most important metric. I actually think it's what Melanie touched on at first. It's the performance of the company. And so you need to understand, like, are we hitting our company goals? Are we hitting the metrics? And what this means is like, you have to get in the head of like, what is our commercial goal? What is our product goal? What did we release? What are the goals of the company that we're doing? And then everything else I find serves that. So engagement score, all these things. Does it matter? Are people engaged in doing their work and therefore performing, or are they not? And you sort of have this problem. People aren't productive as they could be. So you kind of take both of those things in tandem, but at the end of the day, we need to know, like, hey, is this moving the needle? Can we afford to pay for all of these people? Can we afford to pay for all these benefits and things like that? And so I would say that just needs to be front and center for any leader, HR or otherwise.
Melanie and Anita. Oh yeah, please go.
I would probably take it even a step, kind of back and think about, like, I think it's so essential to even understand what metrics leadership cares about, because that could vary in different points in time. It can vary across different organizations, right? Like, what's our primary focus right now? Do we care about growth, cost reduction, operational efficiency? And that's the metrics you want to tie back on. So you mentioned earlier engagement, right? I think if you can tie something like engagement back to like business success, then that's awesome, right? If I see my employees are very engaged, I have a lower turnover rate, attrition costs X dollars, right? And I bring that back to my leadership, that's great, and I am doing the right thing. But I think a lot of times the metrics might be the right metrics, but the storytelling doesn't line up when you talk to leadership. And so I think I would bring it back, talk to leadership, like, what's the primary focus? Then also, who do I need to convince, right? The CFO might need to hear very different things than the CEO. CFO might care about like cost savings, and the CEO cares about growth. So really aligning the kind of data collection with the audience, and also always understanding like who is actually, who's making those decisions, who is budget and all of that.
Yeah, two thoughts come to mind for me. And again, some of this is going to echo what Anita and Luck are already saying, because it's such smart, valuable insight. One is that I personally look at things like engagement survey scores. And I think somebody in the comments was asking, like, what about trust as a key performance metric? I actually don't view these as the end goal. I view these as signals that help me try and understand what might get in the way of achieving the actual end goal, which is driving our business goals. And so if a metric on the engagement survey is low, but I am seeing that it is not impacting the business goals, one, I may just remove that question moving forward, because it tells me that like it's not data that I'm necessarily willing to take action on. And therefore, I don't want to send the wrong signal to employees by continuing to collect that data. Or two, it tells me this is something that is worth digging into with a leadership team, not in service of getting that score higher, but in service of better identifying how I can get the business goal, how I can get us closer to that. The second thing I'll say, which is probably going to seem like a bit of a tangent, but I think it's related, is I think that a lot of HR things fall in the fuzzy realm, right? Like, what is trust? How do you measure trust? What is, like, if you're trying to push for, this new perk, how do I define the value of this perk and articulate that this money is optimally spent? And I actually got into this discussion with my CEO recently because I was really struggling. We have a perk at Athena that I love. It's my favorite perk. You will have to pry it from my cold, bloody, dead hands. Okay. Even though, at the end of the day, obviously my CEO can make the final decision. But one of the questions that she asked me for one of my goals this quarter was, I want you to basically justify that this is a good use of company funds. The perk, by the way, is at Athena, we allow all employees to expense up to $100 per month towards hanging out with each other, either virtually or in person. We love this in particular because we're an all remote company, and it makes my life so much easier because I don't have to plan events anymore, and I don't have to try and make it, inclusive to everybody. Like, if you have a thing that you want to do with one other person, you want to go get your manicure done, you want to go to a Broadway play, please, by all means, go do it. Do not involve me. I don't want to know about it. It's expensive. I do want to know about it. Actually, they all send pictures afterwards on the channel. That's the one asked. If you use the perk, you have to share a picture so that other people have ideas of what to do. And then I learned what is engaging to our employees, but I didn't have to lift a finger to do it. It's just really nice, and it gives them agency, which I think is really key in the modern people landscape. Employees want flexibility. They don't want to be told how to have fun and when to have fun. They just want to be given the resources and tools to have fun themselves. And also, I like the message signaling, right? Which is your engagement at the company is your responsibility. I'm here to empower you, but I'm not here to hold your hand and force you to engage with the company. Maybe you don't want to. Maybe you don't like being friends with people outside of work, and that's okay. That's up to you. Anyway, the reason why I'm talking about this is I think this is an amazing perk. I genuinely believe in the value of it, not just for fun, but I believe that people are building connections. They stay with the company longer because they have their their work buddies. They end up inevitably talking about work, even if they're just getting a manicure, because it's like, hey, by the way, I'm running into this issue. What do you think about that? Right? Like, it's a commonality. The one thing you have in common is work. You're going to talk about it. And so I went to my boss and I said, Roxanne, I got to be honest with you. I think that any metric I give you is going to be complete BS. I'm going to be making it up. I'm going to be pulling it out of my butt to try and prove to you, like, here's the statistic that I spent 3 hours working on to calculate off this formula that, quite frankly, I don't think is actually useful. I think the reality is it's just useful. It's a good perk. And funnily enough, my boss responded and said, Melanie, I don't need you to prove it that much. Like, all I needed was some anecdotes. Like, to be honest, I just went to one of these events and we ended up solving a problem we'd been struggling with. And we came up with this new idea and I'm so excited to do it tomorrow. That to me is the data that I needed. And so I say this to say, if you are an HR person, in fact, give me a +1 in the comments if you are an HR person who has ever struggled to like put a metric to a fuzzy HR thing like building trust or more effective feedback. Okay, so I'm not alone. I would encourage you, rather than spending hours on a thing that maybe isn't a good use of your time, just ask your CEO. Just say, listen, this is a fuzzy thing. Do you want me to spend 5 hours trying to figure this out? Or can you just explain to me, like, what exactly would you need to see to be convinced that this is a worthwhile use of funds? And then you'll save both of you time, energy, and maybe even a little bit of resentment when you find out you spent 5 hours doing this thing and they didn't even care about it. So I throw that out to you because I think it's a common challenge in the HR world, and there is an easier path forward.
Go ahead, please, Anita. Go ahead.
No, actually, I think this is such a good point because I also think sometimes we do things for things' sake, right? So, we are supposed to show everything that we're doing, right? And we're going to spend hours, like, is that a good use of company time? Probably not. So I think this is actually a really good point you're making there, that even when we talk about like showing metrics and all of that, like, also think about your own time or your team's time. Like, when can I do that and when can I just leave it?
So on that point, Melanie, am I muted?
Nope, you're good.
Okay, something said I was muted. Okay, good. On that point, you mentioned earlier, Melanie, the swing from 2020 to now. I'm going to make the assertion that, but want everybody's validation that you agree, that HR kind of swings from a focus on humans are resources to be extracted from, to take care of the people, and it kind of swings. It kind of overswings in each direction until it bounces back the other way. And, we're now kind of moving back towards. So can I hear from y'all? Do you agree, not agree? Do you have a thought about that? Anybody jump in?
I have a pretty blunt take on this, if I'm being honest, which is at the end of the day, it's a contract, right? We are paying for a service and the employees are providing a service, right? And they can opt out at any time. And we as the company can opt out at any time. What changes, for better or worse, is two things. One, the power dynamics and the things that employees are looking for in that contract agreement in order to sign on. And what I mean by that is when it's an employer market, the reality is that because candidates don't have as many opportunities to choose from, sometimes what they're really prioritizing is I need a job and I need to pay my bills. And like, those are the most important things to me. When it is an employee market and there's just an abundance, understandably and rightly so, employers are like, employees are like, you know what? I got more opinions. I got more things that I need and require before I will sign on. And so I don't necessarily think that's a bad or a good thing. That is the definition of the market. Like when people ask, like, how do you define my market value? Your market value is quite literally what other people are willing to pay for you within our peer set, right? And that includes things like perks and benefits and compensation. And so really, for me, in my opinion, it's not that the value of, or it's not that like employees are sometimes just a resource and sometimes they are just a person that you care about. I think that they're always all the things. And the market value just changes depending on the market, the economy, and I guess this ties into the market, but the availability of jobs to choose from.
Would love to hear from the community in the chat as well on this topic. So please share your thoughts on that. And Anita, would love to hear from you. Anything you want to say on that topic, but also what do you see as the long-term consequences for organizations where the HR function is not shifting to, or not already, or shifting to a real business forward focus? What do you see as the consequences, and how do you see that meshing with what's kind of like, how do you see it fitting into the climate of the world right now, like the overall global and business context?
So I don't know if there's a soft way to say this, but I think if a function does not align with business goals, it's going to become irrelevant. It will get sidelined, right? It will lose influence. And so I think it's really, really important, not just in this moment in time, but I think in any moment in time, to really understand, what's going on in the business and to align with that. We don't want to become irrelevant, right? So I think it's really important to align the HR strategy with the business strategy. And I want to give some examples, because I think this can sometimes sound so like, well, what does that actually mean, right? But if your company is in a hyper growth mode, right, you focus maybe on retention. If you're like in expansion mode, you focus on leadership development. And what's really important is you want to be proactive. Don't wait for permission. I think, like you said earlier in the conversation, don't be reactive. I think this is so, so important, not just for HR, I think for anybody, right? You really want to understand what's happening. I think a lot of times when any employee or function solves a problem that leadership already cares about, it becomes indispensable. And so I think it doesn't matter what moment in time we're in. I think it's just really, really important that you understand what leadership cares about and then match that. I think right now, we're not in 2022, right, where we were all like, we could do whatever and switch jobs, and because everybody was in demand, it is a different moment in time. And I think it can sometimes be really hard to adjust to that, especially like Melanie, I love your example, right, with that perk that you have. So many companies had these amazing perks, and then the perks get cut. Like, that sucks, right? But it's just, that's what it is. And I think it's so important to then also communicate to the team and to the staff, why that is happening. But yeah, I think I think you got to go with it. I think in the end, it's exactly what Melanie said, right? We're here to run a business. And so what is in support of that? What do I have to do to drive that forward? That's what I have to do.
And I'll add in, because I think, Anita, you flag a really important thing, which is like, it can come across as harsh, or it can come across as if we don't care. The thing is, what I'm not saying, and I found this is really important, like just as important as saying what you want to say, you have to say like the unspoken thing that people might fill the gaps in with, or like make assumptions about if you don't say it. What I don't think any of us is saying is that like, as soon as it's an employer market and you have more power, you should cut everything, because strategically, that is probably going to backfire, right? What you also don't want is that employees now are completely demoralized and they're not being productive, or they all quit, or you can't recruit anyone else, right? So it's not like it shifts to the employer market, you cut everything. It's strategic, right? The language I always use with employees is, we are trying to ensure that every dollar is optimally spent. If I had unlimited budget, I would love to give everybody free gym memberships, free commute to work, free cat stipends. Okay, I want like 5 more cats, please. But I can't, right? Because if I did that, right, we would run out of money, and we would not be able to continue to employ you, and we would not be able to push the business forward. So I am trying to make sure every dollar is optimally spent. And so when we do make cuts, I always explain why. And I'll give an example of one that we did at Athena recently, because I think, again, we're very open about this, because I believe that you need to be able to justify to your employees and to the world any change that you make. At Athena, we used to offer co-working stipends, or like co-working office stipends, since we were all remote. So we would pay for a WeWork membership for you, no questions asked, for anyone who wanted to work in an office space. And after reviewing our spend, and the impact that it was having, we made the decision that we were actually going to cut this perk because we did not believe that it was driving high impact and driving our business goals forward. We felt it was a nice to have, not a need to have, and that if we took it away, it was not going to decrease productivity or negatively impact our ability to hit goals. Was that tough to say? Yes. But was it what we felt was the right business move? Also, yes. And what we ended up saying was, hey, all, exactly what I said, like, we did a review. We believe in spending our money in the smartest ways possible. It doesn't mean that we're just frivolously cutting. It means that we did an assessment and this was not returning on the investment. However, what we are going to do is we're going to repurpose those funds. And we have since then repurposed those funds and are now going to be hosting a manager offsite. So we're going to be flying all our managers in. And that money that was spent previously on WeWork office space, which was a great, but not ultimately driving the business forward, can now instead be better spent on this other thing that also is driving the business forward.
Yeah.
And that also brings community together. So again, like, I don't think that it's sort of like, it's an employer market, now suck it up and deal with a tough world. It's, hey, it's an employer market. This means that we need to think a little bit differently. And again, really, really push to ensure that every dollar is optimally spent.
Yeah, I hear underneath that, Melanie, something I think of as the health of the whole versus the health of the individuals, and having people in the organization really understand deeply, like not just conceptually, but deeply, that there is no health of the individuals at the expense of the health of the whole. And that when we can frame that in a way people can really feel their intimate connection to, if that whole is not doing well, it might be nice for us for a minute, but in the long term, it really doesn't do anybody any good. Any other thoughts from the group on this idea of long-term consequences for organizations that aren't pushing business forward?
I was just going to say, as everyone was talking, I think as we think about the swings from the employer to employee market, I think the commonality, though, is the people, right? The talent, right? So even though it's an employer market in some cases, you still are looking for that top talent, and top talented people kind of understand how things work and they make themselves valuable, and they sort of, so even though you can have your pick of whoever you want, you still have to make people the differentiator on why they would join your company and like why they choose to work for this brand, this company, this product. And so I think regardless of the market, and I think what's helpful for people having experienced this now, because the last time something like this happened, it happened a while ago. People don't quite have an experience with it, but now because the time frame is like this last 5 years, you have this experience, both if you're like a senior person in the organization or someone new to the organization, where you might have had a layoff, or you might have had to deal with like, we cut this benefit, or you have to pay more for this, or you don't have this. And so everyone sort of has this experience and how it impacts them. And the difference here is like, how do you communicate that? So everything Melanie was saying about how they shared it, and Anita, how things need to connect to the business. It's a moment where we can actually use the market and everything that's happening to educate folks on like, why is this important? Why are we doing these skills? Because I think we all know, like, you try to bring in some leadership training, some people show up, some people don't show up, but it's a thoughtful thing you might be learning. And one of those things is definitely learning about the business. So even if you work in marketing, but you don't know why product is working on this feature or vice versa, you have to understand, like, why are they doing that? How does this all like ladder up to the main goal? And I feel like that context that people are getting now is helpful, and it's helpful for every employee, whether you're in HR or otherwise, to say, okay, this is why I need to do it this way, and these are the things that I care about as an employee, and this is why we as an HR people leader team to say, these are the things employees care about. Like, yes, it might not be huge, whatever, and the cost is this, but this is what our people care about at this stage of the company. So you can be very thoughtful about how you apply those dollars and all of that. But at the end of the day, I think all of these experiences we should take note of and make sure that the org kind of understands why it's related to the business. Because I feel like some of the things that have come up a lot is like, you went from this like pro-employee market, you got every benefit, you got every perk, and then everything got cut, and then everyone's complaining about it, but then all of a sudden people are stopping complaining about it. But I'm like, you have to understand why, give the why of
Totally.
Why we're investing in this and all of that kind of stuff. And I think it helps to connect the dot. It helps to make people kind of come along for the ride for what business is, because there's also people are like, well, you don't care about people, you care about profits. And it's like, profit and people come together to create the business that supports the job that puts us in this position.
So such a great point that I think HR is so primed to be, I mean, not that every leader across the organization shouldn't be doing the dot connecting for the people in their teams, but HR a lot really does fall to HR oftentimes to do that dot connecting and equipping people, not just with comms, but with the actual business acumen to be able to understand better why certain decisions that seem like a take or a loss or a culture change are actually in the best interest of the whole in a way that they can get behind and inspired about. So I think that's such a great comment, such a great insight, Luck. What is the biggest challenge you've faced personally? I'm going to send it back to you, Luck, in aligning the people strategy with the most critical business goals, and not just the things that were important or that you saw as gaps, but those kind of most critical business driving central goals? And how did you overcome that challenge, or did you?
It's a challenge every day. No, I think it is hard. It does take a lot of self-reflection when you meet the moment of like, they disagree with me again and I'm the contrarian. I would say the hardest thing is, again, what pops to mind is this reactivity. So I think a lot of times things that come from for the people function, there's somebody is reacting to something. And so you don't have time, even though me and my team might have thought through a very strategic program that we want to roll out, something shifted, it's less important, whatever. They're not seeing the dots, which is on me. How do you create that narrative and follow through? So I found that it's difficult sometimes because if there's pressure, some leader has heard of something new, or this competitor is doing this other thing, that you sort of have to swing in that direction. And so for me, it's more like, how do I plant the seed sooner? How do I make sure that this long-term game that I'm trying to play can actually show up in the strategy, but still have these like agile, quick wins that can then like start moving that in that direction, and like have the patience of the org to kind of like carry that forward. Because I do think, like I said in the beginning, some things take time to build, right? But like, what are the little wins you can have along the way? And I would say that's how you do it. Like, break things down into smaller pieces. I think there's a lot of this like shifting HR into like thinking like a product. I do think some of these things are really important to make sure that you can actually lay down that long-term vision as a people function.
My mind goes, Anita, did you want to share first?
No, go ahead. Melanie, go ahead. Go.
My mind goes in 3 directions. Let's see if I can remember them, okay? The first is, as much as this pains my dear little HR heart, I have come to accept the tough reality over the past few years, in my opinion, that the most successful people initiatives actually are not driven at the company-wide level. They're driven at the team level. And what I mean by that is, if HR is out there being like, let's be better about giving feedback, I can guarantee that at least 70% of your employees are like, spam, marked as red, and they're not paying attention. And the reasons are many, right? HR feels a little bit more distant, but also because I think that every team, like it or not, has its own unique culture and its own unique problems and its own unique motivators. And so what I have found is actually the most effective in terms of making the two align is rather than seeing your job as being the person who's going to be driving the change, being the person who's going to enable and facilitate the change. So partnering with the team lead and saying, hey, we've recognized this issue across the company. I want to partner with you on a custom approach for the engineering team, for sales. And what comms are you going to send, and how can I make your job easier in doing that? I've just found that has driven change so much better, especially when you think about like, I think most people don't want like a company-wide end-of-year holiday party, but they do really enjoy a team-specific one where they get to hang out with the people that they talk to and work with every single day, right? Versus being in a room of 1,000 people, half of which they don't know. So that's one. The second thing is, I found that most companies meaningfully struggle with cross-functional communications at the leadership level. And what I mean by that is, people do not know what the other leaders on their team are doing on a day-to-day basis. They don't know the challenges that are happening at their team. And so they are getting in each other's way without realizing it. They are doing duplicative work. And I think a lot of people try to solve this by just putting a bunch of meetings on the calendar. Great. Now we're all going to meet with each other all the time, so we're always talking. And nobody enjoys that. I will flag something that's worked for us at Athena is we actually do a bi-weekly async leadership pulse check, and I can send the template out if anyone's curious. But we ask basically, we keep it brief. It's like, it takes you 5 minutes or less. Every 2 weeks, every member of the leadership team has to fill it out. And it's basically an update. It's like progress to goal for the quarter. What's working for you, what's not working for you. And what happens is that surfaces things like, say the sales leader is dealing with frustration on their team because of a training rollout that HR just did, because the due date is the last day of the quarter. And the frustration is, for anybody who's familiar with sales teams, literally everybody on their team is dying as they try to close those deals and hit the finish line on their quotas. And so what would happen at Athena is the sales leader would just say that in the what I'm struggling with portion. And because it's async and all the leaders are required to review everyone's responses and comment, blah, 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 I would see that and be like, shoot, my bad. Didn't realize or completely forgot that overlapped with the sales cycle. No problem. We're going to push out the due date. Done. We don't have drama. We don't have politics. We don't have to let this explode. And our CEO actually, after reviewing, shares a write-up of her summary takeaways of, here's what I think the trends are. I think the product team and the commercial team are not talking, and that's going to be the focus of our next leadership team meeting, and then we get it done. So I will say cross-functional comms at the leadership team level, really critical to ensuring that what you are doing is actually tying back to the business. I am not sure what I plan to say for the third thing, so I will just say this to mind. I know I always do that. I'm like, I got 3 thoughts, but by the time I get to it, I'll forget. But the last thing that comes to mind for me is I think that HR folks just don't. I think there is room for all of us, including myself, to proactively invite people to poke holes in our work. Literally meet with your stakeholders and say, what are the things what people initiatives did I roll out last year that actually just felt like a pain in the butt, and you did not understand why or how that was pushing the business forward? I want to know, because that means either I poorly communicated or I focused on the wrong things. I got into HR mode and I was working in a silo and not thinking about the business. I don't want that to happen. Please help me call it out. Here's my plan for this year. Which of these things make you want to roll your eyes? Let's just talk about it. We don't need to be gritting our teeth. I don't want to say the tough thing. Invite it. I want to know what is bothering you, because that means I'm missing the mark. And this is the thing that I wanted to say, which drives into this. As an example, I remember with performance management, so important. And people were really just ugh, whenever I talked about it. And the reason why wasn't that they didn't care about performance at the company. They super value it. It was because the way I was doing it was requiring too heavy of a lift. Yes. So what I ended up doing, right. And the reality is managers are short on time. They don't have time to go through a robust process every single time to make sure that every employee is driving the highest performance. So what I did was I condensed it to 3 questions. All we do once a quarter at the start of each quarter is we have our managers ask themselves 3 questions about all of their direct reports. And you don't even have to give me a write-up. Do it in your own head. But if there is a problem, you are required to surface it to me. If you don't surface it to me, I'm assuming you did it and nothing went wrong. If you surface it to me, we'll talk. But if you don't surface it to me because you didn't do your job, that's going to be a you performance issue now, right? Now you as the manager have a performance issue, and we're going to manage that with you. I'll share the 3 questions in case helpful.
Yes.
I've heard many people actually, when I share this, adopt it, and it works quite well.
Maybe you can put them in the chat, Melanie, if you don't mind.
I'll put it in the chat. Oh, do you mean don't say it verbally, just put it in the chat?
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
Sure.
Do you mind just putting it into the chat? Because I have some things from the group that I would love to get to right now.
Great.
Okay, awesome. So first, we're going to publish a poll because we want to hear your thoughts on this too. What are the biggest challenges you're seeing in aligning HR strategy with the most critical business goals? And I think all of us, anybody who's on this call, is trying to drive important things. So it's not like anybody is working on things that are unimportant, but what are the biggest challenges you're facing in aligning your strategy with those things that are the most critical to the business? And would love to hear your thoughts on that in the poll. And as we are working on that, Melanie, if you want to share your questions now, I would love to hear them. I didn't mean to stop you completely. I just wanted to make sure to get the poll launched.
No worries. Polls are important. Please answer the polls. The questions are, knowing what you know today, if you could go back in time, would you hire this person again? If this person were to quit today, how would you feel? Panicked or relieved? And are they ultimately making your job easier or harder? And that last one tends to be like a real light bulb moment for managers, because managers often think, especially new managers, they think it's their job to go out of their way to make their direct report's job easier, up to and including like, oh, you've got no bandwidth, I'll take it off your plate, as opposed to realizing, no, actually my job is to drive you to be more efficient, not take things off your plate, because then that leaves me less time to do things that only I'm uniquely set up to do. So yeah, if your answers to any of those questions are iffy, your job is to come and surface it to me. It doesn't mean we're going to fire anyone. It just means we're going to start having a conversation.
Awesome. Look, question for you from the chat. This question came from Daniela. She wants to go back to something you said about HR as a product. And I like this idea of thinking about HR as a product. And I'm wondering if you have more resources on this, or if you know of orgs doing this and how they've made this shift.
Great question. I saw somebody in the chat also put, Jessie's one has a book about this. If you haven't followed her, Jessica's one, she's at Talentful, COO there, talented HR person as well, but has a whole book on it. I started thinking about this when I was at Spotify. So we were trying to, roll out processes to a big tech org and think about things. Not everything was this way, but it started shifting my thinking around it. I still haven't quite perfected it internally, but it's really thinking about like, what are we producing? So it's not just these feel good things, whatever, but what is the product at the end of the day that you're wanting to put out to your stakeholders, which are the employees and the leaders, and really testing it. And so being agile, not making, I think sometimes in HR, you think about this whole big program, it's rolling out to everybody, and you have them again in this big, blowout thing, whereas really you can break it down into smaller pieces, and roll it out that way. And I think someone was on the Modern People Leader recently who is doing this at their org as well. I'm forgetting exactly who, but you can check out like Stephen Huerta on LinkedIn, and they've got a bunch of stuff on that as well.
Awesome. Do you all see the poll results? Because I don't, but if they were published, I just don't know where to see them. Okay, well, I'm going to move on and hope that they eventually show up. Next question, let's send, I'm going to say first to you, Anita, and then let's send it around. So many view HR as a support function, but how have you positioned HR, or how do you see your clients position HR as a key driver of profit and a function with business acumen within the organization? And if you can share a concrete example, that would be great, where it was really driving business performance.
Absolutely. So, I think that, we've talked about this a couple of times before. I think the most important thing first is you always got to understand what the stakeholders care about, right? Like, if you want to, position yourself as the key driver, you got to understand like what do we care about? So like, what's the company's main objective at the moment? Is it growth, cost reduction, all of that? Who writes the check? I want to give a specific example from a client. I absolutely love this. This happened, a few years ago. So one of my clients, it's a large company. A few years ago, when the labor market was super hot, there was all this, it was really hard to recruit people, and they had a really hard time recruiting people. And so at some point they thought, let's just invest in our workforce. And so what they did is it's a very forward-thinking company. They really saw the AI train coming before anybody else did. I think now everybody has to do AI. We have to use all the AI tools. This company saw this 3 years ago, and they started giving trainings and just making this company very AI ready. Now, last year, when AI really blew up and we're all now supposed to use ChatGPT, this company was very ready. So these employees are now ahead of the competition with a lot of things. They know how to use AI tools, and they use this very difficult moment in time when they couldn't recruit necessarily the people they wanted to get the workforce ready for the future. And I think this is such a wonderful example of where they really had a business impact, and it is improving business performance. It's like now they're really well set up, but that was a journey, right? And it was something where it was just a lot of foresight that was needed. So I I just love that example because it's the only time I've ever heard it, where it wasn't just like, oh, the engineers on something, but like the entire organization. This is something that's now being baked into the DNA of the company.
Anita, excuse me, Melanie or Luck, any thoughts on this same question about positioning HR as a driver of the most important business goals? Anything you haven't already shared? I have one that I'm going to throw into the mix, which is I see a lot of folks coming up with strategies that are important, like decidedly important to close gaps, and then focusing a lot of attention on those things that are decidedly important to close gaps, but they are not the things that are the most crucial to drive the most central business goals. So for example, a company that last year was under real real pressure from their board to create profit, and the HR team had developed strong, important goals around leadership development and engagement, and they were knocking the cover off the ball on all of their goals, but the business was failing. It was like progressively getting worse, and the people team wasn't adjusting their goals throughout the year to say, doesn't matter that we're like killing it on our OKRs. We're doing amazing. If we're doing amazing and the business isn't, we need to pivot because something is not working here. So that's my thought, but I would love to hear Luck or Melanie if you have any thoughts on that, especially if they're different.
Yeah, I think that's the key point. I think going back to just like, why are we doing, like what outcome? Like, I think even just clarifying, again, you start these long-term initiatives, right? Or like longer term, multi-quarter, whatever. And you have an idea and it's all in the right, right intention. But really it's like, oh, but this is, breaking. So you have to kind of adjust and fix that thing. And so I think this is the hard part about this sort of market where the economy is really dictating what is happening and what's urgent to the leaders and what's urgent to the board. And you just have to keep that in mind, right? And then know like, what is the why? My founder and I were talking about this. We were working on something, career leveling, all of these things. We had this whole initiative. And then at the end of the day, it was sort of like, okay, well, what's going to move the needle right now? And like, why do we need it? Where does the headspace of all the leaders need to be? How do we adjust this? And like sometimes you have to put some things on the cutting board and make firm decisions on it. But I think it goes back to what everyone's saying, but you have to share why it's happening this way and like when it might come back on the radar, because it's not that it's not important, but right now there are more urgent needs that need to be addressed, right? Like there's a fire, put out the fire, like before you do these other things.
Yeah, I don't have much more nuance to add. I'll just say, like, sort of for me, the really succinct way that I think of it is the people function is literally responsible for the biggest spend across the company. Like we just have the big, I know we often talk about HR not having any budget for resources, so on, and that's true in a way when it comes to like vendors and headcount, so on and so forth. But like quite literally, if you just look at how much money we spend on salaries, I think there's a stat that's something like 75% of most company spend is on employee salaries. And so for me, to have 75% of your company budget ineffectively and inefficiently spent is just like, that's the easiest way to save money. That's like and I don't mean, oh, the easiest way is by making cuts. I mean, by making sure that every dollar spent is bringing optimal value. Every single dollar you're spending on an employee should be bringing high ROI. It should not be net zero or decreasing value from the company. And so for me, like, it's just very simple. This is a lot of money, all. Do you want to be throwing it away or do you want to be spending it smartly? And if you want to be spending it wisely, then let's have smart people functions that tie directly into the business.
Awesome. Poll, we're going to go up again about your own thoughts. Love to hear on how you are positioning HR as a key driver of profitability. And while that poll is up, Luck, back to you on, as HR leaders we've talked a lot about using data. What do you see as the most critical metrics or KPIs that people should be tracking right now to demonstrate business impact as And how has that changed, if at all?
Right now, this is top of mind for me, but I think performance of the business, I think when we think about, and this is individual performance as well, right? Like, so we are just doing performance reviews and want to see how people are doing. And I think that performance number should match how your business is doing, or like they should be correlated in a way to know if you have the right talent, if you have the right people in the right seats. Sometimes it's not about cuts, but like rearranging. I think it is very telling in terms of the org structure. Are things happening the way it needs to be? Are we making things, when we talk about efficiency, we think immediately about cuts, right? But sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it's like, are we overcomplicated? Or do we need to simplify? What is underneath this? And like, why, if this person has really high potential, why aren't they hitting that potential? Is it something that we need to adjust? Because we've just invested all of this time in hiring these people, retaining them. We know they're the right person, but something isn't working. So I think these metrics around your common, performance review process, if you really look at them, it can be really telling about how the organization's health is and how it goes even beyond your engagement survey and stuff, right? It really is telling you about the health of your organization and what's motivating people, which I think is the differentiator in this kind of market.
Anita or Melanie, open it up for you.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll say like maybe a tough thing, which is, listen, I think there are always important metrics to track because they're good indicators, right? Like, I want to know what our turnover rates are. I want to know what our time to fill is. I want to know what employee sentiment is in the engagement survey results. But at the end of the day, it really circles back to what I said at the beginning. For me, I think that the most important metrics are not siloed people metrics. I think the most important metrics are the business metrics. And so that's what I'm looking at. And so again, the others, good indicators, good signals, but I don't think that for me anyway, the way that I do it, I'm not targeting separate people KPIs. I never am. If I am, for me, I think the risk is very high that I lose sight of the business and the end goal.
I really have nothing to add here. I think I very much come from the business perspective on that. So I would very much agree with that.
Yeah. Well, someone is asking in the chat, any advice on how to apply these lessons for a social impact company or nonprofit where profit isn't the only metric of success, but there are other business drivers that may be, they're saying, less quantifiable. Any thoughts on that? That's a question from Juliet.
So I think that goes back to like I'm always a huge fan of talking with people. I forgot Melanie or one of you, Melanie. I think you talked about the teams, right? If it's different markers, like really understanding what different people care about, and then trying to figure out how do I prioritize it, right? In a social impact company, that might be different than if we're a for-profit, but there's still certain things that leadership will care about, right? And so I think figuring out what that is super important. That might look different for other companies. One thing that I always love is asking questions. So when somebody asks me, hey, what can I do to make your job easier? What can HR do to support your team better, right? So if you are in a social impact company, I would think that still applies. Just understanding what people care about. I think that's so important. I think very, very often HR function, other functions, employees think they know what leadership cares about or what everybody else cares about. But if you don't ask the question, you will not know that. And I think that's why having conversations with leaders, colleagues, other teams is so essential, that you really start understanding what is this company that I'm in. And I think that's hard, because once you ask the question, you actually have to then, you should then respond, right? Like either you make a change or you just take in the information. I think that's then the challenge, right? You take on suddenly that thing. Oh, now I have, because information is power, but I should do something with it. So it was a little bit of a long-winded response to say, ask a bunch of questions and get to know your business and feedback on that.
So something else I'll add, that you made me think of, so kudos and credit to you, is I think we're talking a lot, rightly so, about what you do for the existing employees in the business. But I actually think probably more important, that I would argue, like equally, if not more important, is the recruiting process. And here's why, is because if you have all these ideas and this is what you're trying to do, but every person you hire is taking away from that or is not aligned, and so you're having to redo this effort every single time, you're just constantly going to be playing catch up. I will say, because I think actionable tips, specifics, helpful. So we identified this early on when I first joined Athena, that there was just misalignment between like people we were hiring and existing employees. And that's why I say things like turnover rates are important, but like not the end goal, because, you know, to be honest, during that year we had higher turnover, but that was good turnover. We were parting ways with employees that were no longer aligned with the mission of the company and the culture and the way that it shifted. And so that actually was a good thing. But I will say, we started asking questions early on, like, tell me about a time that your company made a decision that you disagreed with and how you navigated that. Tell me about what makes you feel undervalued at a company, or like a time that you did not feel valued at the company. Tell me about a time that you really just like missed the mark on responding to feedback, and why. I don't want to know like why I don't want to know like what you did and how you resolved it, because everybody knows how to answer that. And I learned from it, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we get that. I want to know, why did that trigger you? Why did you respond so poorly? Because those are the things that are going to help me understand if you are aligned with our culture or not. Those are the things that are going to help me understand, as a startup with a shifting culture where sometimes we're going to have to make tough cuts, are you going to be able to come with the level of professional maturity that I need to be able to weather that storm? Or no harm, no foul, if this is not you, are you the kind of person that needs to be at a different kind of company where it's pretty steady and the culture you joined is the culture it's going to be 3 years from now? Unfortunately, that's not us. Therefore, like, let's just figure that out sooner versus wait until you join. And so I would encourage you, like, if you've had like really tough parting of ways or really tough issues, use those as opportunities to figure out what questions could have avoided that in the interview process, and then throw that into the interview process. If anybody wants, I can share. I don't have this already, but I'm happy to put together a doc and resource where I shared some of my favorite questions of the interview process.
Amazing. With only a couple of minutes left, we're going to go around, hear from everybody. What if people are going to take just one single action coming out of this conversation to align with the most important drivers of the business? If they're going to take only one action, what do you recommend that be? Would love to hear from those of you in this community in the chat. Please share your thoughts too. And Anita, let's start with you.
So for me, the most important action is talk to leadership, like talk to somebody. I think there's often such a disconnect between, HR priorities and what the business goals are. So find out what that are. I think there's a couple of things. Have a conversation, pick one HR initiative, based on that conversation, track the impact and feed it back, and just kind of get in that habit of thinking that way of like, hey, is what I'm doing having that impact, that my, leadership might care about.
Sending it around. Anybody jump in?
I'll chime in. Similar to Anita. So it's just take one step, right? I think there was a lot of topics surfaced here, and like you might be anxious about metrics, or you might be anxious about ROI, you might be anxious, or you might just not actually know what we're tracking from a financial perspective for the company. So I would say take one step to talk to one other leader or one other employee to understand like what is really going on there, and like take that forward and apply it to what you're working on, and see if your initiatives line up with what really aligns with the business.
Take us home, Melanie.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to follow. I think you've covered it up or covered it all. Like, just stop spinning your wheels. Go to your CEO, go to your leadership team and ask them what their priorities are, what's keeping them up at night, and feed into those things. That is literally your job. Your job is to empower them to hit their goals. So do that.
Amazing. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for your contributions, insight. Luck, Melanie, and Anita, thank you for sharing your wisdom, and to this beautiful community that I love. You're all connecting with this networking sheet. So brilliant. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your insights. Have an amazing rest of your day. And bye for now, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.